What are the key differences for you dealing with a youth or an adult?
Youths are inherently vulnerable. They are not developed in terms of maturity, in terms physically or mentally. They test boundaries in ways adults wouldn't test boundaries. They commit offences sometimes as part of growing up. That doesn't make it all right. I'm just saying it's part of the ageing process. And you have to recognise all that when it comes to what you do, how you speak to them, how you get them involved in the courtroom. And there in particular, lawyers can end up sort of talking to you and forgetting that they've actually got a client who's the centre of all this. And young people, not always, but some young people will be completely disengaged from the process altogether. And you have to be really conscious of language, and ever mindful of the fact that they're vulnerable.
And it's important to engage them. I think whenever I appear in the youth court, the defendant or the youth is always asked questions by the magistrates or the judge. Is that to try and get them engaged with the system, with the process?
Yeah, speaking directly to the defendant in a youth court, I think, is a very useful tool. Otherwise, it can become a three-way discussion between the prosecutor, the defence, and the judge, or the magistrates, where the defendant is a bystander in his own case or in her own case. And I think the fact that you speak directly gives you a feel also about who you're dealing with, which I think is really important. The thing about youths is their maturity varies widely, and it's not how old they are. You can get a 17-year-old who's still has got the maturity of a 13 or 14-year-old in the way that they talk to you or they see the world. And sometimes the other way around as well. And you get that sense often by speaking directly to the young person. And as you say, the other key thing is it's about, come on, this is to do with you. Yeah. And I'd like to know what you think.
I imagine that can have quite profound impact on the defendant themselves. Have there ever been instances where you felt that you got through to someone, that justice has actually been effective?
I think some of the most rewarding work I've done is probably with young people, partly because they're more open with you when you are able to engage with them. They don't have that caution which mature adults have in being really careful what they say. And often you're having discussion. It depends on the offending. I mean, a lot will depend on exactly what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with serious crime, I mean, that's serious stuff. And the youth court will deal with most crime, save murder and homicide. We'll even deal with some rape cases in the youth court. So we are dealing with that full range of criminal work. But often you are dealing with very troubled young people who've had really difficult lives. And I sometimes wonder whether they've gone through life and nobody really wants to listen or gets them or understands them. And when you start scratching below the surface, you often find there's more to them than the report might say or the lawyer might say. And lawyers have an important function. I mean, defence lawyers are there to act in the best interest of their clients. But the youth court is a very different place. What we're trying to do there is intervene in young people's lives to stop them reoffending. That's a very different approach to adult sentencing. So it's not always about punishment. I mean, it isn't that even in relation to adults, but less so for young people, because you're looking at their welfare, you're looking at what's best for them, you're looking at trying to change them so that as a young person they grow into a better adult. That requires a very different intervention. It requires a really different way of thinking. And it also requires a very different approach to sentencing as well. And as I say, there are some offences where you've crossed the line. It is so serious that there really is no choice. Society has to be protected. But in a lot of instances, you can use other tools for young people. And I think as youth sentencers, we really need to be conscious about that particular aspect of what we do.
I'm really interested in that, in your view as a judge, that balance and grappling between justice being done and being seen to be done, and the importance of protecting society, and punishing where the state has decided that, ruled that punishment is deserved, and then. The difference between, as you say, with the youth court being more emphasis on I think this is what you're saying, there's more emphasis on allowing that young person to not reoffend. So in whatever sentence you pass down, having that in mind. And that balance changing as somebody grows older, because as you say, they're no longer inherently vulnerable. They are full age, and so full capacity according to the court.
I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that. I don't think the fact that you become 18 years old suddenly, magically, overnight makes you a mature adult.
No, indeed,
And also, a lot of people we are going to deal with, even much later in their lives, are going to have issues. They're going to have personality disorders. They're going to have mental health issues. They will have gone through trauma. They will have so many issues in their lives, whether it's addiction, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or these are not excuses, but they are explanations why people enter the criminal justice system. And as a former defence lawyer, I get it, because I knew a lot of the people I deal with as clients, that they were people I dealt with very closely for a number of years. The criminal justice system is not all about punishment. Public protection kicks in relation to some offences as the overriding, I think, objective, especially offences of violence and offences, sexual offences. Really there, I think there's more of an emphasis on public protection. That's not to trivialise other types of offending, because if society doesn't see the criminal justice system responding, then they will lose faith in the system. If they lose faith in the system, then we have serious issues. So what we do have to do is explain in sentencing why it is that we've done something. And I'm not going to pretend that in every single case, everyone is going to agree with the sentence I've passed. There will be occasions where there will be a group of people who think I've just got it plain wrong. But there are guidelines, we operate within those guidelines, and there is a spectrum of view, and legitimate spectrum of view, I think, within even the guidelines. I think if you focus always on punishment, I think you ultimately forget the purpose of the criminal justice system, which is really about ensuring a safer society, where we do not become victims of crime, where those who do break the law are dealt with justly and fairly. And the law recognises there are lots of different considerations when you sentence someone. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this idea of maintaining public confidence is at the core of every single thing we do.
No, that answer is, really illuminating, and I think it's just something that has struck me, and I'm sure a lot of people, I guess, who are interested in criminal defence, that there is this cut-off point of you are dealt with in the youth courts, and then suddenly you become an adult, and the way that you are treated changes. But I think that what you what you said there really, illuminated that for me. Thank you.
I think there has been a change of attitudes, and the Lord Chief Justice actually gave a speech on this a few years ago. That the age of 18 isn't a cliff edge where suddenly you're now a matured adult. This idea of understanding human development and people's developments probably continues until the sort of age of 26, 27, something like that. And that's often reflected in sentencing, their immature age. But I think you're right. I think as a sentencer, I am acutely aware that people mature at different rates. And, in the same way as, learning doesn't always take place at the age of the 11 plus or the 12 plus, some people mature later. Bad decision making, which is often a feature of young people, often changes simply through development and maturity. And that will often vary. And you both know as defence lawyers, your clients grow up one day.
Yeah, it's a nice feeling when you see a client every couple of weeks or once a month, and then you stop seeing them and you find out that they've stopped taking drugs and they've moved away from the criminal justice system. It is a great feeling.
And there can be very different triggers why people grow up and stop offending. Some won't. There is a small number of hardcore people who will offend very late on into their years. But most offending will stop in their 20s. And it could be a girlfriend, it could be having a kid, it could be getting rid of the drugs, the alcohol, or it could just simply growing up. And that's something you have to recognise when you are sentencing and dealing with young people.
James mentioned at the beginning that one of the kind of threads that we're drawing through each of the interviews is that we have this fictional scenario with a young woman who is going to enter the criminal justice system and then interact with different individuals, professions within it. So that's kind of why the way that we've sort of structured who we are interviewing. So in our scenario, we have a young woman. She's become addicted to drugs, and she has taken drugs and then driven to a party. On the way to driving to the party, she's been stopped by the police and arrested. She's then taken to the police station and questioned, and she's basically processed through the criminal justice system. So she will then end up as a defendant in your court. She's young, but she's not a child, so she'll be in just not in youth court, essentially. And I think we've covered a lot of these areas already, but essentially what would be some of the factors that you would be considering in her instance?
She's driven under the influence of drugs.
Yes, sorry.
And has a large quantity of drugs in her vehicle.
Oh, she's in possession of a
for personal use.
Yeah. Driving under the influence of drugs is a serious offence. There is some guidance on it, but there isn't a sentencing guideline on it. People have to appreciate that the danger of being behind the wheel and not in control of a car is probably the lethal weapon least thought of. You'll kill someone if you're not fully in control. That, to me, is the starting point. And that is reflected in the guideline, or the guidance, I should say, in this case, because you're going to be taken off the road. And that's there to protect the rest of us from people who have found themselves in that position. The degree of harm that they've caused, or the potential harm in this case, is a very relevant consideration. But they've not been in trouble before. They're young. Those are factors which would certainly count in their favour. I don't know whether they put their hands up and owned up to it straight away, whether they were frank and genuinely sorry for what they'd done. But those are factors I would take into account. If they save the court and the taxpayer money by pleading guilty, then clearly that should be recognised and encouraged. Addiction is a horrible thing. I mean, it's a slippery slope. to far worse things if she doesn't get a grip of this. If it's for personal possession, then you'd probably be looking to support her. The criminal justice system isn't all about punishment. It's often about changing people, supporting them, so that all of us are safer in the longer term. The idea of rehabilitation. And in that sort of scenario, I can well see an approach which is based on getting someone to sit down and talk to her, preparing a report as to what has gone wrong in her life, that she's now found herself with drugs for her own use, and a possible outcome where you try to explore at least whether she's going to benefit from some sort of program to tackle her drug use, coupled with the very important protection, which is she can't drive, because that is very dangerous. And until she gets on top of her addiction, she shouldn't be allowed to get behind a car. So it's a combination of public protection, a degree of punishment, because we also have to send out the message to everyone. And every sentence has to have an element of punishment, because that's what Parliament has said, what we call a punitive element. But I think overall you're probably going to be looking more to supporting her and getting her to tackle her issues.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating chat, and it's nice for me to see what goes into being a judge, having been in front of so many over the years. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.